Anne. It's such a pleasure to be back here for a second year, and I'm really looking forward to this afternoon's discussion. I was listening in on the earlier panel that is a perfect segue into what we're talking about, because we're going to be talking about managing family business and succession planning. The bit that just ended did mention a little bit about some of the challenges that are there within succession planning. So I do have the pleasure of having three people on our panel today. We have Joseph Okelo, we have Diana Gichuru, and we have Wanja Michuki. And I'll start with the intros the other way around. And we'll start with Wanja, who has, a fantastic background, especially in looking at things from a macro perspective, where she was doing that as a CFA on Wall Street, and then even bringing that down to where we're now looking at family businesses. Although there are some listed companies that are family businesses, it's really great that that sort of background and experience is being applied to even the ones that are not yet listed companies that we're seeing here locally, and that those that have been started across the diaspora. So Wanja is here with us. She's been doing her work with, and she's the managing director of Be Bold Consulting and Advisory Limited. I would urge you to look it up. It's listed on her bio, but it's also she is also there with her website on the Africa Wealth Conference website as well. And you can go and see a little bit more about how Wanja can help you in some of this decision making that goes into succession planning. I also do have the pleasure of having Diana Moravi with us this evening, and she's the head of unit of the family business unit of CM Advocates here in Nairobi, and they actually have offices across East Africa, but also in West Africa. They are in Lagos, and she oversees a team that does private wealth management. And the very thing that we're going to be talking about today, which is how do you plan for succession? So we'll be hearing a little bit more about that from Diana, and really getting a little bit into some of the instruments that are available. I'm sure, Diana, you'll be able to tell us a little bit more about that. And then we have Joseph. Joe, if I get to call him Joe because I've known him for a few years. I hope that's okay with you. Joe Okelo is a founder and chair of the Association of Family Business Enterprises in Kenya. And it's a relatively new organization that's been doing some really important work. One of the other panelists that just spoke, her name is Abiola. And Abiola and Paul Joka were talking about the fact that if you consider that most African countries received their independence just in the 60s, what we're looking at right now is the biggest transfer of wealth, right, over the next decade or so in Africa, across the whole continent. When you think of those who got into business right away, those founders are probably now in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and we as the panelists here today are equipped to help families really plan ahead and be able to look at best practices globally because of the experience that you're bringing to the table, but also because of the technology that is also available. Being able to harness all of that, put it into the current context, right? And really help families plan this and move forward without the kind of statistics that we tend to see in the news. So excuse me for that long introduction, but sorry, yeah, excuse me for that long introduction, but I do look forward to hearing from all of you. And I'll start with you, Joe, because of the association that you've put together, and I'd really like to hear from you what propelled you in that path to decide that, okay, this is something that that is needed. There's a need for it in the market, and you're going to go ahead and step in to be the one to start it.
Thank you very much, Wangeci. So the association, I started the association about 7 years ago. And when I tell people my candid reason for starting the organization was the frustration I felt as a next generation in an established family business. I had come from the corporate world. I'd come from a very large organization, which coincidentally is also a family business. I worked for Cargill, which is a large business or conglomerate with interest in many areas. And anyway, so I started this association because I felt that I'd come from an organization that was very well defined and organized. Then I joined a family business, which was established and had been running, but my role was not quite defined. And I find this is quite common for a lot of next generation who are joining a business that maybe their parents started or their grandparents or their relatives. And you come in, there are a lot of expectations, but there's not a lot of formality. So your role is not quite defined, but they expect you to work miracles. So after a while, I've been in the business for a long time. And I looked for an association in Kenya that represented the interests of family businesses, specifically for those who are in the next generation, and I could not find any. So I joined one that had a global outlook, but they had no presence in Africa. I decided that maybe it would be a good idea to start an association in Kenya. So what I did was I got 10 of my friends who coincidentally all happened to be next generation. We went to a hotel room and I sold to them this wonderful idea of starting a family business association that would represent their interests, and we would figure it out as we went along. It turned out to be a very emotional meeting. I saw friends who were watching their family businesses, who I thought had a lot more autonomy and control of what was going on, literally break down and say that we feel we're trapped, we gave up our lives or our professions, some in other countries, to come home and to be turned into what one described himself as a worker ant, that he's only told what to do, despite being given a grandiose title. So we all agreed that I would register the association, and I had 10 new members. When I did register the association, 9 of my 10 members stopped picking my calls regarding the association. So I realized that this was an even more painful thing than I thought. And I actually started getting support from other family business members who I didn't even know. And the reason for that is, I could understand. Many of them didn't want me to know what was really going on in their family businesses. So I thought there was a real issue here, and the association grew from there. 7 years on, we have over 120 members. We try to remain relevant. We're having different things going on. But that was the genesis of it. It came out about being a next generation trying to find his way in a family business.
Mm. Wow, thank you. Thank you for that. And I think it also just touches on some of the work that Be Bold Consulting is doing, especially when when I look at your website, Wanja, and you talk about the whole piece around systemic coaching and the need for families to work through some of these things that that Joe came across when he was having these discussions. Could you touch on a little bit about that work, Wanja, and how that fits in when you start to talk about succession?
Absolutely. Thank you, Wangeci. And before I start, I just want to say I'm really honored to be here. Thank you, Anne, and your organizing team for putting together such a fantastic conference. So Joe's experience, is sort of like a perfect capture of what the family enterprise world is like for a lot of people. We're dealing with 3 systems: the family system, ownership system, the enterprise system. And the family system is an emotional unit. So when you sort of bring that into an enterprise space, a business space, when you start dealing with ownership and all of the dynamics around being an owner in an operating business, that is going through a transition, it is such a difficult space for a lot of people to be in. And so just because you're in the business, working in management, as Joe said, you may not be making decisions, and you may have ideas that you want to contribute that are not being heard because families have a certain way of communicating. Communication dynamics are not always healthy or functional when you bring them into a family enterprise space. So the coaching, the approach that we take is to look at a family as a system and to understand that system and how that system works, and where is the system stuck? You know, where is communication not flowing? Where are people not being heard or being respected in the system? Where is power being abused in the system? And looking at how that then affects the enterprise, which is the business, which consists of management that may not be family members. You may have your accountants, your lawyers, you know, all the other people that play a part in managing this operating business. And then there's the ownership. So when it comes to a transition, when succession is in play, this is a very fertile ground for conflict. And I was listening to one of the earlier presentations by Catherine, the advocate, and you know, she was talking about conflict resolution with families. Because the level of interdependence is so high, conflict management is something that needs to be understood, because you're going to have conflicts as you move along. You have a group of people who have different values, different goals, and as you're working to align all of that, you have to manage this ground for conflict, such that families can also learn how to do this themselves. You're not constantly going to a mediator to deal with your disputes, but if people get to learn that actually most families are dysfunctional, you know, and understand why without any judgment, without any blame, then it's easier to, you know, sort of put the armor down and come to the table to try and understand each other, and then start to work on the structural component. So we work with families to do that as well. Once everybody's goals, because we are talking about individuals here, once individual goals and expectations are put on the table, and once the nature of this estate, you know, whether it's the operating business or it's a real estate portfolio or a financial portfolio, are understood, and what the requirements are, what it takes to preserve and grow those assets, how you also accommodate different perspectives. Some people, you know, Joe talked about his friends who've come back from wherever they were in the world. Some people don't want to come back. You know, some people want to go and build a life elsewhere. How do you accommodate family members who have their own aspirations and who can still continue being part of the family enterprise, because it will evolve over time. So we take a systemic view. You know, we say that if we look at each of those three components, the family, ownership, and the enterprise, and look at how those systems are functioning or not, then we can work with the family to create a plan that they are all part of. So co-creation is a really important part of this as well, because, you know, in succession transitions, what happens also is that it's a surprise. You know, a founder passes away, a will is revealed, and it's a surprise. Or not everybody is aware of the contents of that will, and you can have mischief playing out. So we're saying that the family, before an event such as death, should come together and create a plan together. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I think that segues nicely into Diana's role, because I mean, I think in an ideal world, and and Wanja, correct me if I'm wrong, or Joe, with your experience, you tell us. Ideally, these conversations are supposed to be had beforehand, right? Before a family sits down with a lawyer like Diana, who will advise on the different structures, mainly because the goals and the expectations have been set. So Diana, would you tell us a little bit more about what you've seen, given the work that you're doing? And if you could just build on a little bit with what Wanja talked about, because I like that, that differentiation between the enterprise, between the ownership, and between the family, right? Because those are very different dynamics, some of which are already institutionalized, right? Like the family itself, but then where you sort of have room to maneuver within the ownership and within the enterprise, and how does that sort of come into play, Diana, when you're really talking to families who are starting to look at what structures are needed to ensure a smooth transition or succession as much as possible.
Okay, thank you, Wangeci. Thanks. I'm also very glad to be here. So yes, I think as my predecessor Catherine had mentioned, who's also a lawyer, it's very important that we see a differentiation between the family business, family governance structure and the business structure itself. In Kenya, we've seen these disputes play out in the public. I think a very good example is the Tuskys dispute. It was all over the media. Everyone saw that. It's how after the founder passed on and the 5 brothers were left in control as shareholders and as directors, how disputes between the brothers, personal disputes between the brothers, ended up just seeping through into the business. And we had these brothers in court all the time. We had one reporting the other to the DCI, saying money is being embezzled. We had the DCI moving, the DCI is the Directorate of Criminal Investigations in Kenya. We had that moving into Tuskys, a private company, to investigate claims of embezzlement. I think at one point, one brother purported to want to wind up the company and served notice for winding up. After that, we had a situation where a report was done, a governance report was done, and they recommended including independent directors in the board. But as soon as a CEO was appointed, who was a third party, we saw now the third generation, the grandchildren, march to the office of the CEO and ouster him in public. So it was a devastating, it was sad to watch. So we definitely have seen such case scenarios that have led to the place where you have to ask yourself as a founder and as the board in a family business, what exactly is the plan when the founder is not there? So one of the things, and as it was well said by Catherine, so I won't keep repeating it, is a differentiation between that governance, family governance structure and the business governance structure. The business has its own governance structure, has what is happening with how decisions are made. It has the board, it has how the CFOs and the CEOs report to the board. It has an advisory, it has which matters are reserved for the shareholders and all that. However, sometimes disputes within the family seep into the business, because if the family are the shareholders, or like in the case of Tuskys, are implicated also on the board, then you start seeing that just disputes between them end up coming to the board level. So how do we advise that? How do we avoid that? By proper succession planning, including now for a business such as that one that has so many family players at board level or at such senior management level, you want to ensure there are ways in which these decisions are made. Traditionally, we've had what was called, creating a family constitution, having the family advisory council, and all those other creations under the family constitution. However, a challenge arose because a family constitution is not really a legal document and couldn't stand against the articles or a shareholders agreement or the appointment letters for directors and such. So there would always be a conflict, which is now why we are moving to, I think if any one of the attendees today attended last year's conference, where we're moving to the concept of what we call family offices, so that the family now is seeking out proper advisors to be able to structure what they're thinking and where they're going properly. And then from there on, represent their position in the board as one. Yes, so I think that has definitely, in Kenya particularly, the need for succession planning is clear to everyone, because we've seen these board disputes come to be seen in the media, which is not something we need to know, and obviously which affects the business fundamentally.
Thank you for that, Diana. And so I'm actually going to pass it back. This was not on purpose, but I'm going to pass it back to Joe. I didn't want us to sort of like go as if we're doing 1, 2, 3, but what you mentioned, you know, really just talking about succession and how these different things interplay has made me think of the association as well. Because, you know, succession is not necessarily something that is, well, in an ideal world, it shouldn't necessarily be considered only when there's death, right? You've got succession taking place even in terms of going back to the 3 things that Wanja talked about, looking at the growth of the enterprise, the management of that enterprise, or even the ownership of that enterprise, where the family may perhaps be looking at a way of exiting the business or growing the business. And so there are changes within those 2 components. Joe, if you could just talk a little bit about that, I think that would also be helpful, just in terms of this whole piece of managing family wealth. How can you move around those 2 aspects in order to grow it and in order to continue stewarding and managing it well?
Succession, I think, is a challenge in not only in family businesses, even in most businesses. We know how turbulent transitions can be. And more and more, we're beginning to hear that succession should be planned way before, long before the succession actually takes place, and that there are certain steps that should be followed. But what tends to happen, and especially in our experience with family businesses in Kenya, is that succession for some reason is never really discussed, or it's not discussed seriously enough to be called a succession plan. And I don't know whether it's facing our mortality or letting go of the reins. You know, it's a multitude of things. And also, you know, I'm looking at that from the perspective of the founder or the person who is handing over. But also when we look at it from the perspective of the recipient or those who are being selected or identified to be the successors. Some of the things have been mentioned earlier, that we're getting to a situation where many of the next generation have simply no interest in the family business. And whatever more, you know, whatever obligation or guilt they may have had that the business educated them and put them in a privileged position, they don't feel they don't feel that they need to be part of the business at all. That can be a challenge. We know it's a very emotional thing. And so what tends to happen is that the succession process is procrastinated. It is never really dealt with. And it seems that our preferred method in Kenya seems to be death, sadly. When a founder dies and we see this scramble of things start to have to happen because, you know, the ship must continue to sail. At a personal level, we were in a situation where our family business had existed, or one of our family businesses, but our main family business had been in place for 40 years. And I would say from around the 35th year, we started looking seriously at whether we, the next generation, wanted to continue with the business in its current state, or whether we wanted to bring in outsiders to buy a stake in the business. And that was the first point where we started really looking at what is going to happen next. The decision we then took was that we felt it was time to exit that particular business and move on to other things. But it was a process. You know, you have to get, everybody has to be on board. We had to start thinking about what is it going to look like afterwards. And even the business that we now had to, one of the businesses we had to create to kind of, because this business spawned another business. How was that, the structure of that new business going to be like, and who's going to have the responsibilities? And some of these discussions are not easy. They're not, because we start trying to weigh who is and who isn't. In the family business that we were involved in, which was an educational institution, we were 4 family members. We were all shareholders, not equal shareholders, but by the time of the exit, only 2 of us were working actively in the business. And so even when our shareholding was being sold, you know, those are things that will have to be taken into consideration. Now, the new business we formed, we had to ask ourselves, how do we want the shareholding to be, and what is the basis going to be? So I think succession planning is not it is not easy because it's especially from the perspective of a founder, they're facing the reality that at one point they're no longer going to be the ones in charge of the business. I don't know if that has shed any light on what.
No, it has, and I see Wanja has switched on her microphone. If you would comment on that, especially that piece around just, you know, and going back to Joe's point about the founder, you know, how do you help your clients get to a point of first of all separating the enterprise from the ownership? Because you know, Diana has mentioned some of the different structures that are in place, right? And how you can bring in like let's say outside management or whatever, and that would be on the enterprise end of things, where you know you're bringing in third parties or outside parties to help you grow the business, and perhaps maybe even be the successor in terms of the management of the enterprise. But you know, how does that then fit into how the family views that from an ownership perspective? So if you could just elaborate a little bit on that, I think that would help. Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, it's rare for the whole family to come together. You'll find that it's one person. G2s are more, the next gen are more open to being the first point of entry into this work because they are the ones who are struggling, you know? They are the ones who also know that if this is not sorted out by the time the founders are no longer there, and a lot of times, you know, the founders hold things together, then they know what they're headed into. And, you know, in the case of Tuskies, for example, it's a case that's bandied around, but I'm like, do people really appreciate what they're going through as individuals? You know, they're not, the press can turn these into soap operas, but they are far deeper in terms of the emotions that the family members are dealing with. So somebody comes in knowing that. It could also be, you know, the founder. And for us, the most important thing is to make sure that we are connecting with the founder, because it's, you know, what are your goals? What is your vision? What are your objectives here? What also do you own? You know, what is it that you own? And who are the stakeholders? Who are, you know, your spouse, your children. So first we map what actually exists. Then in that process, we get to understand what are the dynamics that you may have an older son who is not capable of taking over the reins, maybe. Your youngest is the most capable, yet that is likely to cause friction because the last in line, first in line, you know, people have been waiting for this moment to become the leader. How do you manage those conversations? Very difficult conversations, even for the founders to say, we have identified a successor. How do you make your successor selection? What competencies are required that may be missing? So, you know, people talk about a board, but is it a properly functioning board? How are those decisions made? Because just because a board exists does not mean that it's functioning well, you know? So what is the process in which decisions are made? Are there minority beneficiaries that are sort of ignored just because they have a minority vote? And you'll find that because family dynamics come into the board, this is where you have to also understand family roles. Are you the family scapegoat? Are you the one that is going to be sort of kept out of the major decisions? A lot of that plays out. If you understand those dynamics, that's why when you find families showing up in court, because there's something wrong. It's not just a question of, you know, people thinking that court is a field day. It's a horrible space to be in. So we unravel all of this. What are the dynamics here? You will find in a lot of families, for instance, there's an identified patient, the addict, who can never get it together, but they are going to be a beneficiary. And what is that about? What in the family system are they carrying that has led them down this path? So we're trying to bring back a healthy dynamic at the family level. Now, from that space, people can think more clearly, because it's like, oh, okay, you understand why somebody reacts in a certain way. You may be dealing with historical impasse in relationships, opposing goals, incompatible values. We align the vision. Then you look at, okay, what is the enterprise? What do you have? And what are your plans? People have, could be working with a family that has a ton of land, and they are going to distribute that land to their children, but maybe they want to keep some for development. What's the structure for that? Something that is held, that continues to be held by the whole family, the operating business as well. You may have some people in management, some members in management, some members aren't. Are they entitled to equal ownership? You've got to look at equality versus equity, because again, this is where, particularly if you have a large age gap, some elder siblings might say, well, we've been here longer. We've been here longer, we've been working longer, we deserve to have more. And mind you, these are usually things that aren't even spoken. They're there, like holding the system down, but no one's actually articulating that this is how I feel, or, you've had it so much easier, you were the favorite. Issues such as favoritism kick in, but no one says it. I resent you because you were favored. So we get to bring that into conscious awareness in a very gentle process. That's what the systemic work does, and that's what the coaching does. It helps people actually say what the reality is, so that they can find resolution. And we are not coming in to triangulate, because you find advisors who come in and they're like, wherever they're getting paid, they take sides. It's so destructive to families, We're saying we want you to be in the driver's seat of your own process. So we empower families through the coaching, which is the awareness, but also educating families on, these are your options. So take the time to think through which options suit you, but come together and agree together. And it's a process. It is a process. I mean, this does not happen in a week or 2 weeks. You can have a client that disappears for a year when it's getting really intense emotionally. And it's just because people need to process what they're learning, what they're discovering, and then they can move on to the next stage. So I think also, even when you talk about family offices, a family office is a wealth management solution. And, your family dynamics will not be sorted in a wealth management environment, but it becomes important once the family knows how they're going to structure and move forward. That's when we suggest that they then go talk to these other advisors, talk to the lawyers, because lawyers, again, are not going to deal with your emotional unit. They're not operating in that space. And the worst thing is for a fragmented family to go to a lawyer for a solution, I personally find. Because someone somewhere will be left, it will not necessarily be a win-win solution. So they're obviously absolutely essential, especially when you're dealing with ownership, property rights, and all of that. When you're dealing with contracts in the business, the employment contracts and what have you, absolutely essential. However, and we put an emphasis on this, the family comes first. The family comes first, and the family can put together a structure that can then be formalized by these advisors. Yeah.
Yeah, and sort of going back to what Joe talked about in terms of sort of burying our heads, I had put together a little poll here, and I'd like to see if our participants have that. It's the one where we were talking about whether people have thought about succession and whether they have put, if they know where they're supposed to go, if they want to put plans in place, if there aren't any written ones. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the plan. I mean, the poll, there are only 3 questions, and it's just yes and no. I've done it in between, so I'm sure you've picked up also on where some of these solutions can be found. So you can, let's see, we've got 1 person who's answered, and I'm waiting to see whether the rest of them will continue. I should hope that it has popped up for everybody. And it's really good. There are people who have started to think about it, a couple who have a written one, and yeah, let's see what they say about a choice. We can see a little bit more about whether they know who they need to involve to get it done. So we're almost there. If we could get to at least 15 answers, then I will stop it at 15. Although we are 21 of us, it would be really good to just hear from everybody. But it's good that the thoughts are there. They haven't been put in writing, but the thoughts are there, because I think that's where it needs to start, which is on question 1. Do you have an idea of what you would want your business succession plan to look like? We have 36% of the people saying yes. We have 60% saying no. Do you have a written succession plan? And majority, 93%, have said no. Only 1 person has one. And then, do you know who you need to involve? We have 47% saying no. 53, that's great. Well, now we're at 50-50, but still it's really good to see that majority do feel, or almost majority do feel, that they know who they need to involve to get this done. And you know, and just really going to what the panel has spoken about in terms of really, you know, communicating very clearly. And I'll just speak for Kenyans more generally. I think that we tend to be a little bit more passive aggressive about it. We'd rather not talk about it. I think it was what Joe was saying about these things aren't usually discussed, and I'm still not sure why. I haven't looked into our history, whether that was something that used to be done in our different communities, whether that was a discussion that was had before, or whether it was just expected to go a certain way, so it didn't need discussion because you had cultural norms already in place. I don't know, but for sure we tend not to talk about it. But as was mentioned in the previous panel, you know, we are in that generation where we are looking at our continent's biggest wealth transfer being about to take place over the next decade or so, and the more equipped we are to deal with this sort of succession, the better off the future generations are. You know, there's a statistic that's thrown around that says barefoot to barefoot in 3 generations, right? You have the founders who started off barefoot, created this huge enterprise. You had the second generation that was there when it was being built, that were there succeeding along with them. And then you have the third generation that sort of inherited all of this and are sort of like, I don't know why they end up being barefoot again, but they tend to be the one that sort of runs down whatever enterprise had been created. But what we're also seeing, though, is that in as much as that is a global statistic that we see there, we also see all these massive companies that are listed companies, or some that are known, but they are still privately held companies. And I'd put one, we'd put one together with Anne. I'm going to take this one down, where it would just be, I'm just curious to see if people identify some of these companies and know whether these companies are family-owned businesses or whether they think that they're only public companies. Regina, I don't know if you have those ones. We had about 7 companies. We tried to mix it in between the African ones and others from other parts of the world. I'd be curious to see what our listeners think. And when that is coming up, Joe, just going back to what the association is also doing for some of its members, could you talk a little bit about that? I know you said that you've been around now for 7 years. You have over, is it 120 members now? Sorry, 150 members now. And if you, 120 members now, yes.
Yeah.
So if you could tell us a little bit more about how do people end up being a part of your association, and how do you also work as an association with advisors like perhaps Be Bold in just trying to help your members figure all of this stuff out?
Yeah, so the association is like, you know, it's a business membership organization. It's like most other associations where the responsibility of the strength of the association comes from its members. So we ourselves do not disband. We work with resource persons. And for example, the work that Wanja is doing is commendable. And those are the people we seek out to work with our members. Because most of our members join, it is sad to say, because of the challenges they face in the family business, you know, and they feel that something has to be dealt with. And again, if I go back to what Wanja said, is this the voice of the voiceless? You know, power is never distributed equally in family businesses, and that becomes very apparent in many stages in the evolution of a family business. So the association tries to work with a lot of different resource persons, but we also find a lot of learning and help and healing comes also from family businesses sharing amongst each other. So there's a lot of peer-to-peer, where people see, oh, you know, the challenge you had, that you're going through, we also underwent. And this is one possible way of resolving it. Yeah, but we have a blend of members and associate members, because we still recognize that there are a lot of legal aspects, although it's family business and there's a lot of the emotional and things that have to be dealt with, but there are also legal things that have to be dealt with as well. And so we also like to work with lawyers and more now we're, you know, and again, I also want to extend my gratitude for being asked to speak on this conference. We need to start working a lot with a lot of wealth management. As had been echoed in a previous panel, that there's this large transfer of wealth going from one generation to the other. And it's not only unique to Kenya, it's a global thing, but more so in Africa because of when a lot of the countries got independence. But what I don't know whether was mentioned is that a lot of this wealth is actually going to be lost. It's not going to be transferred successfully to the next generation for a myriad of reasons. You know, we see a lot of founders are still very secret about what they own, and so people actually don't know what is owned. And sometimes that is the preview of only the founder or a lawyer or a trusted colleague, and they don't feel that they need for this information to be shared. Secondly, you know, a lot of houses are not in order. So there's all these things happening. A lot of this wealth is being lost. Some of the next generation come in and they're fully aware of this and come in and say that, look, we need to act immediately because we foresee this problem coming. This was brought out very clearly for us as an association during COVID. And so we saw, rather than see a decline, we saw an upside because we lost certain members, certain founders succumbed, most of them were more vulnerable than other members of the community. And so some of these things had to be discussed. So that's really the job of the association, being there representing family members and seeing how, as family members of a family business, what we can do to strengthen these businesses so they can continue. You know, so we don't have, as you said, barefoot to barefoot in three generations. Although one thing that I would like to clarify is that family businesses might not last as, you know, that 3 generations. However, they do last probably as long as other businesses do. You know, it's just that there's a lot more focus on them that they seem to go through this cycle. And we realize there's certain things that they're extremely vulnerable to, uniquely so because of their nature.
Yes. I mean, I think it's that it's that piece around communication, isn't it? and what the expectations are. And going back to the spoke, right? I keep thinking of it in my mind as the 3 circles, Wanja, right? Of the ownership, the family, and the enterprise. And again, if it's not clear around that, then and again, that's where a lot of these challenges sit. I see that my little poll hasn't come up, but I guess that's okay too. But we can, just to give you some of these examples of those that have carried on over multiple generations. The big ones that we have in Kenya, where they're still in, I guess they're still in that first and second generation. We haven't seen the founders exiting, and that can also be said to be true for a lot of the ones that are on the continent. But then, statistically, I think some of the oldest family businesses tend to be European. We have a few of them that are American, a few of them that are Asian, but I guess because they're the ones who have been keeping track of this longer than others, most of them, like I said, tend to be European. And some of them are companies that we hear and use all the time. Like you wouldn't expect that Samsung would be a family business, and it is. Right? And it's still a privately held business, which is also another interesting thing, because, you have a massive one like Walmart that's still considered a family business because the family still has majority of the shareholding, right? Not 50%, but they're the largest single shareholders of the company. But then now it's a listed company. So that remains a public company, just so that our listeners can be clear about what I'm talking about when I say a public company and a family business. And so, you can have them be as big as Samsung and remain private companies, and other really huge ones like Porsche, right? Or even here on the continent, like Dangote, or here in Kenya, the Samir Group. So you can also find that there are aspects of it that are you have multiple enterprises, and some parts of it are listed and some parts remain just within the family. But there is that possibility, and I guess it goes back to how it is structured and what the vision is for the family that takes it over, because the founders have grown it to where they grew it, right? We have a few more minutes to go, and I'd really like to just hear from all our panelists today about, I guess let's call it. Shall we call it your parting shots? And I'll start with you, Diana, about what your parting shot would be for this evening.
Okay. Thanks, Wangeci. So before I give my parting shot, let me just mention something about what Wanja said. So it's for sure that the thing about a family business, what makes it unique is that it is a family, it is the justice in the definition, family and business. So at first it is a business, which is a legal creation. So there is no dispute. Legal issues, tax is a legal issue, structuring, shareholding, directorship, all of that is a legal issue. So there are no dispute. You need proper legal governance structures. Corporate governance is a legal issue. So that one, absolutely clear. So family, I think that's where sometimes the problem comes in. So that I agree with Wanja that it's twofold. It's both, as much putting aside the legal process, now the family part is also a social process. So question is, how do we tackle it? I think in my experience, what I've seen, and which is a challenge, and maybe Joe could also tell us what is his experience with his, especially maybe the younger family businesses. But with my clientele, what I've seen is that the patriarch starts too late, or the matriarch starts this conversation way too late in the day. So by the time it's being started, the things that Wanja was alluding to, people feeling like scapegoats, some people even feeling entitled, others feeling a certain way, others feeling that they're, some feel entitled and therefore want to behave a certain way, whereas others are feeling like they've not been given enough, or they've just gotten the the smallest part of the cake. So I find that that's when now the real issues start, and the emotions and the squabbles. So my advice is, and our practice now is that we do work with consultants even when we are going through family businesses, because we'll do the legal very well, but we understand there's a social aspect. So my advice for people who are starting their SMEs, because statistics, KPMG statistics from 2016 show that at least 80% of SMEs in Kenya start off as family businesses, meaning control is with a family. So people who are working on their SMEs right now, your SME starting now, start the conversation now. When your kids are still going to campus to take up their business degrees or whatever they're learning, just start getting them involved in what your expectations, what your objectives as a patriarch or the matriarch are, and also what your apprehensions are maybe. I find that it's very easy to get a client to tell me what his vision is. That's very clear to him at any one time. He'll just say to me top of mind. When I ask about his apprehension, he stops for a bit. But we have to have that question. We have to have that conversation, because we know at the end of the day, as a father, as a mother, as a parent, you see it. You see it in your kids. You know which one is the lazy one. You know who wants to get too much for too little. You know who's actually able to, like Wanja was saying, you know why maybe the firstborn may not be the obvious CEO, but the second-born may be, or the last-born may be the better CEO. Like, you see it as a parent, but you need to find a way to bring it out in a way that doesn't crash your family, maintain those familial ties. So I think that it is important that all founders realize that it is a two-pronged process. It's social and it's legal. And if you're able, start the social as early as possible in terms of, it's an attitude thing. Make sure that there's love, there's peace, just engrave those values in your children as early on as possible. Yeah, that having been said, I think for me, something that we haven't mentioned, but I think is key, should not go without mention, is the question of legacy. I think all founders should be very proud to leave their legacy in the business, but just be balanced in how you want your legacy seen, so that you're not compromising the legal just over what you're calling legacy and therefore making bad decisions. I think seek out advice, as we've seen. There's various, very different people whom we can talk to. Lastly, my very last point is even our legal framework in Kenya is really changing. As you might know, we have new laws. We have the amendment to the Trustees Perpetual Succession Act that came in December 2021. This law has now been made such that it's made such a good environment for creating trust in Kenya, which will help in perpetuating wealth, consolidating and perpetuating wealth within family businesses and within families. So I think keep up to date on such, because we see even the government now is trying to create that environment. They have made a lot of tax exemptions for family trust. You can move them without paying CGT. We can move them without paying duty. There's a lot of, we're not taxing the income at the trust level. So it's a very conducive environment now for consolidating your family wealth and for structuring it in a manner that is tax efficient and as well that is able to be perpetuated to subsequent generations. So I would urge all founders to take advantage of these laws, and I'm most grateful that the government is seeing that that's necessary. Yes, that is it, Wangeci.
Thank you, Diana. Joe, over to you, and maybe you can let us know if you told your members about this wonderful new trust act that we have. Anyway, give us your parting shot.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, yeah, I think that this is a very relevant thing that we're discussing here about succession, because we've seen the challenges that are happening in families with transition. I think a point that I would like to leave with, or a couple of points, is one is the point that Wanja made, and it was a little bit provocative, but true, that most families are dysfunctional. And the consequence of that is that most families then therefore have a very fragile coexistence. And that becomes very apparent in cases where one founder or the patriarch and matriarch both pass on. Then it becomes very difficult to have any sort of control. And we see it happen time and time again. I think a concept that family business have to learn is that ownership and management are two distinct things. Many times they're intertwined, and for the simple fact that many owners manage the business for a long time, and the businesses tend to outgrow them, but they still have the mindset and this hanging on to control. So we have to face the fact that we are only here for a period of time, and that if we want these businesses to succeed us, we have to prepare the way for that. Now, I can only be descriptive. I cannot be prescriptive, to tell people that you have to learn to communicate and communicate in such a way. If it was easy, then, everybody would be doing it. But I think the approach that Wanja is taking about the coaching and mentoring and making the minority voices be heard, I think that's a very, very important step. But the conversations have to start, and they have to be in a non-threatening, it's almost idyllic, but they have to happen because these problems keep perpetuating. We see them happening over and over and over again. So with that, I would like to thank everybody who has listened in and for all of you for indulging me. Thank you so much, and for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. And over to you, Wanja.
I think it's such an important conversation, and really well done, Anne, for bringing it out and also making this African, because we also have our own cultures to take into consideration. And one of the governance tools, the family council, we had that. We actually had that in our traditions. Families were larger, and even through the succession process, we'll get there, because once you get to G3 and you've got the branches, you're coming back into that sort of council space, where the interests of every single family member were paramount. And I think that these are some of the structures that really need to be brought back, where the strength of the pack is found in its members. So it's a process. Even the work that we're doing is a process. One of the things, Wangeci, you had asked was, has there been an increased interest? And yes, there has. And it could be because of that wealth transfer, founders from the late 50s, early 60s, who acquired their wealth then. And now, whether it's death or infirmity, that wealth is passing over, or people seeing the disputes that are sort of rife in the papers. A patriarch dies, doesn't take that long for the beneficiaries to move to court. It's such a waste, because these family enterprises can create massive opportunities for everybody, and there's scope for growth. But if you're not focusing on strategy and focusing on how you're gonna, carry it, hand it over to the next generation and generations to come, then you're also missing opportunities that are right in front of you. A lot of people, I think, don't realize how wealthy they are as well. Landowners, people who have a lot of land, think that they're not wealthy, and they are, but they just haven't sat down to think about how to capitalize on that asset. And as earlier, Anne, in your presentation, you were talking about agribusiness, real estate. People have these assets that they can monetize. So my parting shot is that people have to respect each other in this process. And I think that it's not greed kicks in and sort of throws everything, tears everything apart. There is so much more than just having this wealth. There's your social capital and what you can do in the communities that you're in. You find that a lot of wealthy families will go into politics, for instance. That is part of your enterprise capital. Your philanthropy, what are people doing from a philanthropic standpoint? This gives you the opportunity to make a contribution to life, and leave the world a better place than you found it. It's not so much about, personal possession and acquisition. It can give you a wonderful lifestyle, a great education, educate your children, give people purpose, gainful employment, and also so much more, and I think that we just need to start thinking bigger, beyond the self, to what can this wealth contribute and continue contributing through time, because it is possible. It is possible for us on this continent to create that. So yes, thank you to everybody who joined. Joe, as always, wonderful to be on a panel with you, and we will be speaking very soon because I also see lots of opportunities to work together. And Diana also, you know, a pleasure meeting you here. Wangeci, thank you for your incredible moderating. It was really, really fantastic.
Well, thank you all to my wonderful, wonderful panel, and for all of the listeners. Jerry Jomo has said it's been thought-provoking indeed, and that is certainly what we all got out of this. And if we do nothing, it's not because we didn't hear or we were not told. So this responsibility is now on us to take this forward and to action it. And again, Anne, thank you for putting this together, and over to you.